All right, so we talk a lot on this channel about the horrific things, the actions that our institutions here in the United States have taken, whether it's domestically or abroad. It can be within our incarceral system, it can be with our foreign policy agenda, our militarism and imperialism, or it can be things like immigration. And so, you know, when Democrats were hyperventilating and screaming about the kids in cages, rightfully so, under the Trump administration, while seeming to ignore the fact that those cages were indeed built under Obama, while they were screaming about the kids in cages, once Biden finally took office, there was this idea that he was going to substantively change the situation at the border and change the horrific treatment that immigrants receive when they try to come to the United States seeking asylum or seeking a better life and opportunity for them and their families. And yet we've seen some of the exact same things that were done under the Donald Trump presidency done yet again under the Biden presidency, even though we've had reports of, you know, some positive things like, okay, Biden administration closed 2 ICE facilities after allegations of abuse. One of these was actually in my home state of Georgia here, where they were literally doing forced hysterectomies on women. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the bare fucking minimum, right? I mean, talking about literal ethnic cleansing, talking about horrific human rights abuses going on there. So pretty easy to shut down those things. But where it gets a little bit more nuanced, I guess you could say, is, you know, he did the executive order towards the beginning of his administration where he said that he was going to be basically ending U.S. Contracts with private prisons. Of course, when you get into the actual details of this executive order, it was nothing close to addressing the actual problem. It only did, you know, a handful of prisons in the United States, whereas the majority of the private contracts with prisons and incarceral systems here in the United States take place elsewhere, like with institutions such as ICE and Customs and Border Protection. So he pretends as if he's going to solve these problems, gets heaps of praise from the media, and meanwhile, shit like this continues to happen in the background. So this is a recent story that just dropped from the American Prospect. Biden administration ICE contracts encourage forced labor. So a contract signed in April with the detention facility in Port Isabel, Texas, continues a $1 a day wages for those detained. So this is not something that's new. Before we get into the details of this story, this is something that not only applies to ICE detention centers, this applies to many prisons across the United States, where inmates are forced to do labor for below minimum wage in what is basically modern slavery, okay? That's the easiest way that you could use to describe it. So here are some of the details. Instead of attacking President Joe Biden for his immigration policy, Fox News pundits should probably be praising his administration for keeping the gears of the U.S. deportation machine well greased. Within a week of Biden's executive order in January, purporting to rein in for-profit prisons, Immigration and Customs Enforcement quietly announced it would be soliciting bids for yet another especially lucrative indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract for its detention facility in Port Isabel, Texas. And not only that, but ICE under Trump and Biden has been adding new language encouraging the prisons to exploit those detained in violation of state and federal labor laws. Biden's executive order states, quote, to decrease incarceration levels, we must reduce profit-based incentives to incarcerate by phasing out the federal government's reliance on privately operated criminal detention facilities. So sounds good, right? Well, only 10% of all federal criminal inmates are in privately run facilities. The real federal money is in the ICE jails housing civil detainees such as asylum seekers, and 98% of those in ICE dedicated jails are earning money for private prison profiteers. Let me say that again. 98% of those in ICE dedicated jails are earning money for private prison profiteers. So this is not an isolated problem in a couple different prisons here and there. This is basically what ICE is doing, okay? ICE and CBP and the Department of Homeland Security, but especially ICE, exist for the sole purpose of exploiting these people, exist for the sole purpose of cracking down, oppressing, and wielding violence against these people for the crime of seeking asylum in the United States, for the crime of trying to find a better life for them and their families in the United States. So this is what our country is doing. Since Biden's been in office, ICE has signed new contracts with private prison firms worth more than $260 million, the majority since April. And even worse, some ICE contracts include new grammatically incorrect language condoning the exploitation of those awaiting immigration hearings. Quote, detainee labor shall be used in accordance with the approved detainee work plan and shall be paid $1 a day. Shall be paid $1 a day. Is this the Scrivener's error or evidence that Biden's ICE couldn't settle on how to work around federal laws prohibiting wage violations and forced labor? So Joe Biden, his administration, again, is just continuing in the footsteps of Trump, who was continuing in the footsteps of Obama, who was continuing in the footsteps of George Bush, and this never-ending campaign of violence and oppression against people who are trying to search for better lives for them and their families. This is how we approach immigration in this country. Whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, these are the types of institutions that are being supported and funded and endorsed by our political leaders in this country. So another thing that you have to understand when we're discussing things like ICE and Customs and Border Protection and the Department of Homeland Security, and when I call for things like the abolition of these institutions, you have to understand these are younger than me, okay? ICE and Customs and Border Protection and the Department of Homeland Security were created under George W. Bush. So I am 21 years old. I was born in 1999. And ICE and all these other institutions are younger than me. They're not some long-standing institutions that have existed for the entirety of the United States that, protect our borders and secure the American public. That's not at all what these institutions were designed for. From the outset, their explicit purpose was to perpetuate a system like this. Okay, this is the same type of thing that was happening under the Trump administration, where cruelty is the point. Cruelty is the point. Okay, so they extract profits, these companies that are working in contract with ICE and these other private prisons, they extract profits from forced labor, essentially, from immigrants. And again, they're talking about civil detainees. These are not even criminals, okay? These are people who are trying to wait trial. They are trying to wait to be able to have their cases heard in front of a judge for immigration proceedings. Okay, so they're not even criminally offensed people. They have not committed any criminal offenses, and yet they're being subjected to this. But beyond that, of course, nobody should be subjected to this. This is forced labor. This is slavery, okay? We have a word for this, okay? We've actually done it before in this country, so there is historical precedent, believe it or not, and it actually never stopped, and this is what we're doing now. So, after we got rid of slavery in this country, right? We moved into the Jim Crow era and all of these other oppressive laws that were put in place to oppress black people in this country. Part of that was mass incarceration, and we have done that, especially since the Reagan era, have just locked up ridiculous amounts of people. The United States, I think the statistic was something like, we have 5% of the world's total population and 25% of the world's total prison population. So we're imprisoning more people than any country has throughout the entire history of the world, and this is the type of thing that we are making them do in our prison facilities, in our detention facilities through ICE. So the solution to this, okay, is the total abolition of ICE and CBP. This is not an institution that serves any function that breeds safety for the American people at all, in any way, shape, or form, and they need to be abolished. They need to be completely eradicated. They don't serve any good purpose for this country, and they're just committing human rights abuses right and left. Again, the most recent example that I heard was here in Georgia, in my own home state, and I can't express how frustrating that is, that within my own home state, they were doing forced hysterectomies on women. This is just, it's atrocious. It's crimes against humanity that the U.S. government is not only endorsing through people like Joe Biden, but is explicitly funding and deciding that this is how we want to operate with our immigration. So I support an immigration process that opens the legal avenues so that people can actually immigrate to this country legally, and so that we don't have some of the most restrictive immigration policies in the world, while also completely mistreating the people who are trying to come to this country in search of a better life. Immigrants, believe it or not, help our economy. They're not stealing any jobs, as conservatives like to say. They boost economic growth. They boost jobs. There's absolutely no reason to have this ridiculous criminalized approach that we have going on here. But this is Joe Biden, so understand, even with the headlines and the moderate steps that he seems to be gesturing in the right direction, this is the type of shit that's happening in the background, and we absolutely cannot be silent about it.